Charter school advocates are holding rallies around the state this week to call for fair funding. They say they're getting shortchanged in comparison to what other schools get. But they're also doing more than just talking. They're holding voter registration drives so that people who are not already registered can sign up and vote on issues such as this one. Joining us now from our Buffalo newsroom is Duncan Kirkwood, Western New York Advocacy Manager of Northeast Charter Schools Network. Welcome to Capitol Tonight, Duncan. Good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So before we get into the advocacy piece of this, which is really fascinating, I mean, there's sort of a recognition that the more people who are voting and influencing and on a particular issue, the more power you have effectively in the halls of power in Albany, right? So we'll talk about that in a second. But what is it that you believe is happening specifically in Buffalo as compared to other schools, other public schools and other charter schools?
So first, again, thank you for having me on. My name is Duncan Kirkwood, where I'm the Advocacy Manager for Western New York with the Northeast Charter Schools Network. But more importantly, this is a very personal issue to me. I'm a parent. I have 3 children. One is in a Buffalo public traditional school, and one is in a Buffalo public charter school. And so this issue of equality is very, very important to me as a parent, as well as, doing the advocacy work as well.
So do you feel then that your public school kid is getting more in terms of resources? Does he or she have better facilities? Does he or she have better books, computer access, etc., than your child who's going to charter school? And if so, why not put them both in public school?
Right, and so I answer your second question first, which is why not put them both in traditional public school. As a parent, I have to make the choices that are best for my children, right? And different children have different learning needs. They have different, trajectories in life. They have different styles of learning. So I have to put them in the school that's going to best equip them to be successful. Now, as far as does one have more than the other, Buffalo public charter schools only get 3/5 of what a Buffalo public traditional school student gets as far as funding from the state. Buffalo public charter schools, do not receive facilities funding. Rochester charter schools do not receive facilities funding. And we just feel like that's wrong. It's wrong, it's unequal, it's not fair, and it doesn't benefit the children. And as a parent, it's kind of offensive to say that my kid is only worth 3/5 of what another child is just because I chose a school that better suited her learning abilities.
Well, also, you're talking about facilities funding. We've talked about that on the show before, and charter school advocates have been really pushing for that hard for a couple of years now with modest success. And I say that because there are some New York City charters that are able to access, not all of them, but some of them. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. And, it's frustrating because not only are, Western New York charter schools kind of getting shortchanged as far as it relates to funding equality with the district schools, they're not even getting funding equality with charter schools, many of the charter schools in New York City. So just because I live in Buffalo and Western New York, or these countless parents that we're organizing and kind of building momentum with, just because we live in Western New York, the schools that we send our children to don't receive funding. But if we lived in New York City, by and large, a lot of those children would be, their schools would be receiving charter schools facilities funds. And that's just not fair.
So there's a lawsuit, actually, that a number of families, including some Buffalo families, if I'm not mistaken, have brought challenging the way that the state funds charters. It's called Brown v. New York. And where does that stand right now? Do you know?
Yes. So the first round, we won. And so now the state is challenging the court's decision. So they're appealing the court's decision. So we're kind of in waiting and letting that process play out. But we're very confident because, if you just look at, it's Black History Month. So you look at the 14th Amendment, the U.S. Constitution, it says that no state shall deny any person under its jurisdictions equal protection under the law. And 3/5 is not equal protection under the law. Or like in Rochester, 68 cents is not equal protection under the law. And so it's a no-brainer that this is clearly unequal, it's clearly unjust, and the parents and community members in Buffalo, New York, and in Rochester are no longer going to be quiet. We're no longer going to be left in the cold. And so part of my role is to really get these parents galvanized. As they hear more and more that their children are getting the short end of the stick, they get angry. And so we want to take that anger and turn it into action by registering parents to vote at every single event.
So before we run out of time, that's the key here, because, you know, and I know you're not necessarily unfamiliar with this fact, but voter turnout's been kind of crummy in New York, generally speaking. Now, we expect that this is going to be a decent year in terms of turnout because it's a presidential year, so it's going to pull people to the polls. But what you want is a sustained movement over time. And how are you going to make sure? It's one thing to register. You just fill out a piece of paper, not that hard. How are you going to make sure that they get there?
Well, we're going to continue to do organizing and advocacy work on a regular basis. We're going to have parent groups at every single school that only focus on advocacy training and learning how to fight for their kids. But I think that we are going to start to see voting numbers change, at least around this issue and around our parents, because when you tell somebody their kid is getting screwed over, when you show somebody the numbers of how their kid is getting shortchanged, they get angry and they want to do something about it. You mess with somebody's kid, and that's a problem. And so we're starting to see that energy start to build, and we're hoping that state lawmakers, you know, will hear our cries from Western New York, will listen to us, and will take the appropriate steps to finally come together and fix this funding inequality problem.
Do you believe, I mean, that we've seen less actually, and I've talked about this on the show too with some of your advocate sort of colleagues, advocacy colleagues from different organizations. This year, charter schools sort of on the back burner as compared to other years. You know, it was really the flashpoint between an still ongoing political battle between Governor Cuomo and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, but they've moved on to other topics. And we're not seeing the sort of rallies of the size that we saw before and the really hot debate that we've seen before, which makes your task all the more difficult, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. But one thing that elected officials do respect is consistency. It's not just a flash in the pants. It's not just one day of advocacy, but a continual phone calls, emails, Facebooks, tweets, op-eds, parents showing up to their offices on a regular basis is going to be that push we need to really be heard. I feel like you said that we were not really seeing that. The charters are in the front lines, so to speak, of the discussion right now. That just means that I and me and the Northeast Charter Schools Network and our school leaders here in Buffalo and our school leaders in Rochester have to do a better job of bringing that issue forward, right? We have to make sure we put our foot on the gas so that they continue to hear us and they will have to listen.
Okay, well, obviously they've heard you this evening. We'll continue to report on this issue as well. And Duncan Kirkwood, I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on.